Welcome to Gateway Office Hours. I'm Ben Larson, and this is Carter Laren. We are the co-founders of Gateway and this here show, Gateway Office Hours. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad I could, and I'm sure Carter is too.
Jury's out.
All right. Well, I'm dead to you.
This year's show was a
asshole. Anyways,
They're so dead to me.
on the socials at Gateway VC.
Yeah.
Gateway VC on all the socials.
Are the dad jokes going to get worse as your child ages?
Oh my
Is
God.
that a thing that we're going to have to
I
deal
spent a week with my son and wife, and I'm like reloaded with dad jokes. I was just like, they'd start rolling off the tongue. Like by the end of the week, I was.
Yeah, we've noticed.
Yeah.
Nice Hawaiian tan, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, there's a voice
over
here.
Jim McAlpine.
Why don't you introduce
What are you
our
doing
guest?
here? Today, we have Jim McAlpine, the man. 420 Games, New West Summit, snowbomb.com, Canna Athlete, Canna Dad. Is there anything you don't do, sir? How do you have the time, and how are you so lively all the time?
I've been busy lately. I need a vacation like you just had for sure. I got a lot on my plate.
Yeah, you have New West Summit around the corner, which begs the question, why are you here and not preparing for that? But we'll get there, right?
Right.
I think we're supposed to be preparing for it, too.
Yeah, well, we don't prepare, but I assume other people do.
Yeah. So we're super excited to have Jim on the show today. Jim, you've been doing great work as far as normalizing the plant and the industry, bringing in new consumers, new audiences, new investors. We're going to go through all of that. We do really want to kind of get to know you a little bit about how you ended up in the industry. But really, because it's near and dear to our heart, being a conduit as the mainstreaming of the industry. So we're really going to focus in on that. But I actually was familiar with you way before the cannabis industry because of snowbomb.com. And so I kind of want to start there. And just like, was this your first entrepreneurial journey? What is it that really drove you kind of to creating just awesome events for the ski community?
Thank you. Good question, too. It's fun thinking back to that when I started that, because it's kind of like I'm almost reliving what I did then again now as an older guy, because I took something that was my passion and that I loved, which was skiing. Mm-hmm. And I started skiing late. I went to University of Colorado and really got addicted there to skiing. And when I graduated, I said, I'm going to figure out a way to create a job around being a skier.
Doing what you love.
And so literally at first it was like, I wanted to be on the hill as much as I could, and I was starting this little company to get deals and discounts, and the next thing I knew, I was working so much I could barely ski. But no, it was really like finding something that I loved and then creating a career around it is why I did that. And I'm still doing it actually. We still put on the Snowbomb ski and board shows three times a year. Or 3 events in November, so it's San Francisco, San Jose, and Sacramento, and yeah, I think as I was saying earlier, the ski and snowboard world and cannabis go together pretty darn well. So it's a nice transition to jump over.
I think anyone that spends time up in Tahoe is familiar with that concept.
So you were in, you ran Snowbomb. That went well. It was successful. Life is pretty good at this point. You're doing something that you're passionate about. What was the impetus to kind of add cannabis to the mix?
The only reason I was happy about the drought we experienced for 4 years was that it inspired me to do this, because I wouldn't have jumped in. Like, I'd always looked at cannabis but was doing pretty well, and it was like kind of no reason to jump over. And when there was a drought for 4 years, it really radically affected my business and my income, and it kind of was like, you got to think of something to do next if it doesn't start snowing again. Thank God it did. Right. So I literally drove up. I said to my wife, I'm going to drive up to Tahoe. It hasn't snowed for 3 years. I have to think of a new business. We called it a vision quest. Okay. And I literally, it's kind of funny. I bought a bag of weed, cannabis, as I should say, and I put it down on my table in Tahoe. And right before I even took my first inspirational toke, I look up and it's Vice, and it's about the green rush. And I literally, I'm sitting there on my vision quest, and I'm like, oh, okay. And that's where the 420 games were born.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit about what the 420 games are for people who aren't familiar with them.
Sure. So, you could think Tough Mudder or Spartan Race. They're runs. It's a 4.20 mile run. We do other stuff like guided yoga meditation sessions and CrossFit challenges. But in essence, it's basically just using athletics to destigmatize both the plant and the people that use it medicinally and as an athlete for focus and recovery. So we go around the country and put on runs to change that perception of cannabis.
So this is really interesting because I think it's been alluded to earlier. In fact, one of the reasons we named our company Gateway was kind of, we viewed part of our mission as kind of bringing cannabis into the mainstream as kind of a gateway to more mainstream audiences. And we were talking before the show a little bit about the juxtaposition between the stereotype of a stoner and what we think of as like an athlete. It's a really odd juxtaposition. It's different than doing something for musicians, for example, right, where we kind of expect them to be stoners or whatever.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit about, I think a lot of people are surprised that cannabis and athletics could go together at all. So give people some info on that.
I think it opens people's eyes too in a new way. It does surprise them, and then it makes them think, which is important. And when you look at a musician or an artist, you kind of already have that stigmata, if you will, of the stoner kind of lifestyle. They sit around and smoke and play and paint or play music. But an athlete, especially like a UFC or NFL guy, those guys are in top physical condition, and they're out there really like not being lazy. So it's
working hard.
Yeah. And so to me, the Gateway, I love your name. To me, it's a gateway to wellness. Cannabis is a gateway to health. And it is a gateway drug, not to other drugs. So I love your name, and these athletes, I think, just make people stop and think and look at them and be like, wow, maybe I've looked at this plant the wrong way. Because in this modern era, I'm not going to name names, but there's so many words being flung around by so many people that I don't really respect, and people don't listen anymore. So using an athletic body type or using an athletic feat to change perceptions, I think right now works better than words, honestly.
Well, so you said something real. I didn't mean to interrupt. I wanted to double down on that because you said something again before the show, and you just said it again, but I want to underline it for people. A lot of times we think that the way to change perceptions about something is to talk about it, and you're kind of saying people don't listen, but they do have this vision of kind of athletes and professional athletes with whom you work quite extensively, and you don't have to really talk about it. You just have to show them that there's something that's broken about their vision.
Yeah, and to me, that's the word normalization starts to come into play here, because when I'm talking about cannabis outside of what you're saying, I just talk about it like a normal word. I used to whisper, be like, oh, I hope they don't hear me. But now it's just in my conversation normally. And when we ingrain it with those athletes and everyone else, it just becomes a part of our lifestyle. Athletes are part of the American culture, and them embracing cannabis is going to make cannabis eventually be part of the American culture.
So how do athletes use cannabis typically? I know that everyone's different and blah, 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 but what are some ways that athletes use cannabis to enhance their performance and take care of their bodies?
Great question. I've toured around talking a lot about that, and to me, I like to simplify it and really put it into two categories. So myself, I really like using cannabis for focus before I work out, whether it's going for a swim or to the gym or a mountain bike ride, skiing, surfing, skateboarding, and pretty much anything. I get my mind into a point of what we like to call activation, kind of focus, eye of the tiger, if you will.
Sure.
And it just gets me so focused on what I'm doing that I've got that in the zone mentality. It's something called flow state. Are you guys familiar with flow state?
I think most people are, but I think it's worth explaining because I think a lot of people don't know what flow state means, and so I would go ahead and talk about it.
In the focus realm, it's a gateway to flow state. And flow state, everybody knows what it is, but by definition, flow state in a scientific sense is when you're in the zone. Like, you can be in flow state if you're a guitarist ripping a solo. Sex can be flow state. Any type of something where you're really focused on what
Coding
you're doing.
at 3 a.m. for
Yeah.
6 hours.
That's what I always think
Yeah.
of flow state, but that's a personal
That's good.
personal history. Yeah.
And it's when your mind and your body become one. It's technically in the zone. And I think a lot of people that use cannabis just allows them to drown out the noise and all these thoughts that are in their head all the time. I'm an ADD guy, and that's what it does for me. And it just allows you to focus on that athletic activity or training that you really want to have your mind 100% on.
So that's one way it's used for athletes. What's the other category?
I think the more mainstream and more kind of accepted way that people already know is recovery. And there's, whether it's you want to smoke some and use the THC side of things to feel better, instead of having a beer, it's been, again, in American culture, you finish a race, you drink a beer. Like, using a little cannabis afterwards can help.
Which is actually not, by the way, not great for health-wise. Drinking a beer for your muscles after a workout is horrible.
Yeah, they call it carb replenishment to kind of guise that.
Yeah, but the alcohol is
and
not good for
dehydration.
your muscles. Right?
In no way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Cannabis is much better, and that's the whole point. I think the American culture has ingrained alcohol around sports, which I don't like, and I'm actually starting intramural sports leagues around cannabis versus alcohol. But coming back to your question, really the second one is recovery. People can smoke to just feel immediately both brain and body better. We all know that and have tried that. But also, as everybody's starting to learn the CBD and the topical gels, and I'm a big proponent of whole plant medicine. I believe the THC and CBD together has an entourage effect that's more important and prolific than just using one. But yeah, the recovery aspect is one that, for everyone, even outside of athletics, you look at the geriatric community and people that are aging and need it. I'm almost 50 and my knees and back are bad, and I use it when I'm not being an athlete as well for recovery.
Sure. Well, we're also starting to see kind of the neuroregenerative properties of it. And when you're talking about football players, which I've seen you in the mix with, like Ricky Williams and others in the industry, with the CTE scandal and all that kind of stuff, it's like, how much is cannabis really going to impact athletics is the question, and what's really exciting for me.
We've been doing panels with Ricky and with Evan Britton and Nate Jackson around, we did at South by Southwest, the Super Bowl. We were even at Harvard Medical School doing a panel on exactly this. And yeah, it's a quote unquote neuroprotectant, and the guys that use cannabis and have played in the league are very hopeful that that's going to help protect their brain from all the concussions that they had to suffer through their career. So yeah, the neuroprotectant side of it, I don't think there's a huge amount of proven science behind it, but there's data and numbers that already show us that it does work. We just need to prove exactly how at this point.
And I just want to be, I like to mention this when anyone says there's not proven science around XYZ with cannabis. It's not because it's necessarily difficult to prove, or it's just because it's illegal. It has been illegal to do a lot of the research that anyone else would be able to do on things.
Lack of empirical data because of federal legalities.
Right. So that makes sense. So, it seems, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like cannabis use in a lot of professional athletic circles is kind of an open secret. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in almost all sports, and some of them are more prolific than others. I think it's interesting to hear the jiu-jitsu community is a huge cannabis athletic community, and marathon and runners that run long distances. It kind of goes against the lung thing with running. But yeah, I think it's been around since long before in the 70s a movie called Pumping Iron came out, and it was Lou Ferrigno and Arnold Schwarzenegger, the two most prolific. They were competing for Mr. Universe. There's scenes in that of Arnie hitting a joint and then just ripping some curls at the bench press. So it's been around for a while.
You're saying our governor imbibed?
The governor.
The
yes.
governor.
He's the governor.
He's done a lot of things, but that's another show.
So speaking about jiu-jitsu, I don't call you out, but someone just walked in who also...
A former guest.
Yes, a former guest, Sabo. You guys both have kind of started and you just mentioned kind of this cannabis, intramural athletics around cannabis league. Can you talk about how that works and how does someone who's just kind of curious get involved in that, and what do they experience?
So shout out to Sabo. What's up, Sabo?
Hey, everyone.
You're not Ben.
I'm not Ben.
Welcome.
No, Sabo and I met through the cannabis industry. He's literally one of my best friends now, and
best friends.
We are partners in something called Canna Athlete, and I met him through the 420 games and his sponsorship with Vape Exhale. But really, what we're doing is proliferating what we just talked about by two things. One is an event series called the 420 Games, and we go out and we do these athletic things. But what Sabo and I have done is create a line of cannabis products. It's kind of like FUBU with the Russell Simmons stuff, for us, by us. This is FABA, for athletes by athletes.
FABA.
Yeah, FABA. So, we're athletes. We've used this our whole life. So we work with all these professional guys, and we've created our first two products, are a focus spray and a recovery serum. So they're made specifically for athletes to go in and get focused, or after a workout to have.
And there are sprays and serum. It's not a vape or anything, or a joint.
No, right now we're only doing edibles. I think from my personal perspective, I think it's the most healthy way to ingest, and I try not to smoke as much as I can. So as we start this off, we want to kind of show people our preferred methodology is edibles. And then, of course, vaping is much better than smoking, so we'll come out with some products for vaping soon, too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I should ask you, I would not expect your answer to be edibles as your preferred method of consumption based on everything that I know about you, but am I wrong?
I think the answer to this question depends on what result and effect I'm looking for. So many times edibles is the preferred choice for me, especially before going to bed and before competing. And then throughout the day where I like smaller doses, then dabbing is a much better methodology for me.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
As an athlete, an edible product allows you to stay at kind of a consistent, elevated state in your mind. And when you smoke, it's kind of up and down and you feel the burnout. So for me as an athlete, the reason I like edibles is that I stay on a consistent path mentally.
That makes sense. So, okay, so we've talked a little bit about, the 420 games and how you're using athletes to kind of help cross the divide or bridge the gap or whatever the metaphor is to kind of help bring cannabis into mainstream, show people that it's not about dude, where's my car necessarily, but about being productive and using it for health and wellness.
Yeah.
Another thing though you've done with New West is it's one of the there's Ben and I joke a lot that there's a cannabis conference every weekend, and everyone has a cannabis conference. And mea culpa, we did one when we first came in as well.
We did.
So
Probably much to his chagrin because we actually announced at New West 1.0, right?
Yes.
Well, we're partners now. We're doing it together,
Yes,
so
yes.
it's all good.
But one thing that you do that most of them don't is you bring people from outside the cannabis industry in to speak. Is that intentional? And tell me why and kind of what the response has been from outsiders.
Yeah, so the baseline of everything I do is cannabis is secondary. So I put on an athletic tour of events that focuses on advocacy for cannabis. I put on a technology conference that happens to be focused on the cannabis industry. Using technology players, global ones outside of the industry, to represent disruptive tech, like using the example of Uber or Lyft, like a phone disrupted the entire taxi cab industry around the world. Right. And having people like that in specifics, like Richard Branson last year or Susan Bennett, who's the voice of Siri, come in, it's the same thing. It breeds normalization. It's not just a cannabis event, it's a technology event, and true global brilliant players, Dave Morin and Roger McNamee, two incredibly brilliant men that I respect a lot. Mike Harden from Big Rock Capital are all going to be speaking, and they all made their fortunes outside of the cannabis industry. So I think it just says a lot to have true global tech players speaking to the brighter minds of our industry, so we can emulate what they did.
And so what has been the response from mainstream? I mean, do you get a lot of rejections when you reach out to people and they hear cannabis?
Yeah, I'm going to actually, straight up right now, one of my good friends is Nick Woodman, who's the founder of GoPro, and he's refused me. Nick, not cool, bro.
Really? GoPro?
Yeah, and
I guess we'll take him off our list of reaching out.
Totally not even his brand should absolutely be involved.
Yeah, and Nick's the coolest dude in the world. I'm just giving him a little guff, but it's because they're a publicly traded company, so his PR person won't let him do it because they're worried about that being on the NASDAQ or whatever. Their stock's not doing so great. But Nick's rad. GoPro lifestyle's right in line with what we do. But that's the only time, using Nick as an example, when there's the federal legalities that comes into play with worries on the public company side.
But in general, it's been very receptive.
Yeah, no, I mean, Richard was going to speak again this year, and people are actually kind of excited to speak and come out of the closet, per se.
Yeah. We talked about this a little bit earlier as well, where there's this kind of people don't talk about it until you bring it up, and then suddenly, actually every Friday I go home and smoke. That's what I do, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually a lot more pervasive than people want to admit.
Yeah, it's funny, back in the day, before this was all legal and stuff, it would kind of be like when you're with someone, you'd be like, hey, you puff, bro? Throw it out there and you'd see. But now I think when that door is opened, you find out so many people that you would have not thought used cannabis, from grandmas to CEOs and all this stuff. So like you were saying, it's really interesting when you give them that door that's open to not feel ashamed about it, they like talking about it, and it's an important part of their life. So I think breaking down those walls so more people can talk about cannabis is probably my most important goal over these next couple years, is to continue to allow more people to not feel judged and chastised.
I think to a large extent people feel relieved that they can talk about it. And we didn't talk about this earlier, but I'll share with the audience. It's an analogy that I use just from my own life is I was in the sex toy industry for a while, and sex is viewed as this taboo thing. You're not allowed to talk about vibrators or sex toys, or it's not a polite company thing. But once people know that you're in the industry, they would love to talk about it. That's all they want to talk about. They won't shut up about it, and they just want to talk about it. And I've noticed the same thing since we started Gateway. We'll go to mainstream like VC events and that kind of thing, and I'll go with my wife, who's also a venture capitalist but not in cannabis. And I think she gets kind of annoyed with me sometimes because she'll introduce me to a group of people and oh, what do you do? And I'll mention Gateway, and like the conversation just immediately turns to nothing but cannabis.
Correct?
For the next hour, right? I think that's a really good sign. People are really itching to be able to talk about something that they don't feel like they can talk about.
An analogy I often use is using the gay movement and the acceptance of gay rights. And when I grew up, it was a very closeted thing, and a lot of slang was thrown around that wasn't friendly. Even my family members and stuff did that. It was just part of American culture where it was in the closet and you disparaged them almost.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And now I'm so proud to have grown up and have a lifestyle with kids that really see the opposite side of that, and being able to be who you are and be proud of that. So for us in the cannabis movement, it's almost the exact same trajectory as the gay movement, where we're finally at that apex of like, we're coming out of the closet, and if you don't like it and you're going to chastise us, you're kind of the asshole, not us.
Right. History, it's kind of clear where history is going.
Yeah.
Right. And you're on the wrong side now if you're going to chastise us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It feels good.
Yeah. I was going to use this as a segue to talk about the Canada Dad thing.
I was about to.
Okay,
as
good.
Well. So, go ahead.
Yeah, so along those lines, you're a father. Sabo, you're a father.
Yes.
I'm a father, and now Ben's a father.
Woo!
Yeah.
So we talked also about kind of the stigma as a parent, specifically as a father. You talk a little bit about that and what you have started to kind of, let's say, fight that stigma or give support to people in the industry.
Yeah, and again, it was my good buddy Sabo who founded that with me. We created that literally because we're super engaged dads, and we're pretty proud of that, and we really enjoy the time we spend with our daughters. And as we started talking about it, we kind of realized that there's not a lot of, not that we need to be championed, but there's not a lot of talk about engaged dads or people that look at dads and how they interact with their kids. So to me, it was just important to show the world, bringing cannabis into this. Although I'm a cannabis guy and I use cannabis and all that stuff, I'm a really engaged father, and it actually makes me a better dad, being straightforward. Cannabis, I used to come home from work and have a few bourbons, and when I did that, I'd kind of sit in my chair and want to read my stuff, and I'd almost be like, hey, don't bother me, kids. Yeah. When I use a little cannabis and I come home, it's like, oh, let's go play, let's go out in the backyard or do something, and it just makes me appreciate them more, and I don't want to be embarrassed about that, and I don't want others to. So we've got a Facebook page, over 2,000 strong now. Hopefully, wow. Ben, you're going to be posting some Canadad stuff up there. But yeah, it's almost an advocacy page for us to be able to be proud that we're fathers and we use cannabis.
Is there a stigma you think would be with other parents?
Yeah, I think less than you would think, though. My wife is a PTA or was a PTA member and was very, very worried as I came out into this industry. And I don't think we had anyone, bar maybe one family, that acted a little weird with us. I even had the principal of my daughter's school call me in and thank me because she saw me on the news or something and said, hey, I saw what you're doing and I want to thank you because I think it's great. And that's my kid's
incredible.
Principal. Yeah, so I was worried about it too, and literally haven't had any pushback from anybody.
That's great. That's great news.
Feels good. And I want everyone else, again, that's my big thing, is pushing people to I know there's jobs and finances on the line, so when it's that place, I understand it. But don't feel like you can't talk about cannabis. That's my whole reason for coming on this show, going around the country and speaking, is like, I use it every day, and I'm a good guy, and I try to be a good person, and we all should do the same.
Well, Jeff Sessions would disagree, but
So a lot of this, like looping it all together, a lot of it is like providing a voice for the industry, and a mature voice, recognized faces, kind of speaking about the industry where you wouldn't expect them to. How are people in the industry, especially companies as yours, leveraging these different, influencers to get out their brands or to build a reputation, what's a good strategy for that? What have you used as far as these different phases?
I mean, for myself, I've associated with athletes and people that are very focused on wellness. So outside of the professional athlete realm, like we talked about, I mean, Sabo's an influencer himself, and we've got there's a girl, Amy, that works at Willie's. There's, it's a great question. There's really actually in the last 2 years, 3 years, the Canna athlete and the Canna health things become a social movement, and people their Instagram handles are like CannaFit or Fit Cannabis Girl and that kind of stuff. So there's almost a groundswell of organic social movement people that are creating their own identities, and it's not even like I'm going out there to reach out to them. It's like this thing has struck fire across the nation, and everybody kind of understands it and wants to be part of it. So I don't even feel like I'm proliferating anyone on the normal beyond the celebrity side. I just think it's caught so much fire that you can see everywhere on the internet. There's so many people putting pictures of themselves smoking and working out or being well. So I think it's almost taken on a life of its own, to be honest.
Have you had to deal with any issues with Instagram or Facebook accounts being shut down or any of that?
Luckily, not too bad. I petitioned Facebook a couple times when my ability to advertise was removed because of cannabis, and we just wrote a nice, fairly eloquent, we're an advocacy company, we don't sell or use cannabis at our events, and we got our rights back. So, I haven't had that, and I think that people should, if they do get shut down, take the time to write a nice and respectful letter in, because it did help me. I was shut down several times, and every time I've written in, I got my ability to advertise back.
Interesting. Michael, we need to get on that.
It's frustrating, though. I mean, it is very interesting to see companies just shut down for no reason whatsoever and have no reason given, and then other companies that are more egregious have their pages stay up. I wonder what the process for picking and choosing how they do that is.
Yeah, I think they purposely keep it pretty
shrouded. Yeah, I mean, I think there's even a larger discussion about YouTube, Facebook, Twitter as platforms generally, and the opaque nature of who they shut down and why, because that seems to be just generally, even outside of cannabis, a confusion to a lot of people. So that's cannabis is, I guess, a little bit more predictable, but still confusing.
Let me ask you guys something. As we have New West coming up, we've got this pitch slam going. We've got some cool companies. I've always been a bit of a pickaxe guy. I don't touch the plant so much outside of Can Athlete, and I've created events, and I've kind of used that mentality. I'm going to be the pickaxe guy that sells to the guys going up into the hills. Yep. But as we come into this pitch session, we've got all this new startup community, and I'm interested because I haven't even got to talk to you guys about this yet. Right. But what do we have in store at New West for us with this pitch session?
Well, I'm not allowed to know because I'm one of the judges. Ben is the one looking at the kind of pipeline of people coming in that are going to pitch. Yeah. So
no, I mean we've been getting a ton of interest, and it's been super exciting. There's all across the gamut. We put our normal gateway filter on it, where it's we want an early stage company that has an ambitious founder. The company has to be scalable, so not just a dispensary, but something that's going to grow beyond that. And we have things all across the board, from plant science to software companies to maybe delivery services. So exciting things. I hope some of the bigger brands are going to be in the room so they can see what young guns are gunning for them. And yeah, we're actually looking for investment opportunities. So the companies that are competing, you guys, maybe there's a little bit more on the line than just the $10,000 prize.
Yeah, there's a future of support and intelligence around you, and I really respect you guys, and it's cool for me at New West because we've added a bigger investment component this year. We've got this spectrum of what you guys are doing, which gives this voice to people that might not have the money to buy a booth or come, which I love. And then on the other side, we've got Alan Brockstein and New Cannabis Ventures, who's doing a international public companies symposium, and we've got Bruce Linton from Canopy Growth, which I think is the second biggest cannabis company in the world, next to GW.
I was going to say, they're smaller than GW?
I think they're number 2, but they're one of the biggest in the world. Yeah, and we've got 10 global public companies outside of the U.S., mostly Canadian, coming. And so the contrast of these huge publicly traded companies down to the guys you're bringing in that are at this seed and startup stage, it's going to be really cool. So I appreciate what Gateway's done for our New West Summit and folding Elevate in this year. It's going to be good.
You mentioned that being the pickaxe, right? And just for people who don't know, the analogy is kind of the gold rush analogy. Instead of making a lot of money trying to prospect for gold, you make a lot of money selling shovels and pickaxes and Levi's jeans, right?
Yeah.
To people who are part of the gold rush. And one of the things that I think first-time founders do when they see a new industry and they're excited about it is they just run for the kind of obvious thing, like, oh, cannabis is legal now, I'll sell cannabis, right? Which is okay, that's good, but maybe not the best way to do things if it's not really, if your passion is kind of around something else. One thing that I think can be inspiring is to see someone who has a passion around something else and they're adding cannabis as a component. And I don't want to templatize your business model and make it sound too formulaic, because it's actually quite difficult to do. But you've got these two Venn diagrams. You've got like, oh, athletics, athletes, and cannabis. All right, and that's where you found an intersection. What do you say to people who are kind of looking at the industry and think, maybe I want to get involved. I don't know how to get involved. I don't know exactly what to do. My inclination is just to go sell pot cookies, but maybe that's not a great idea. I mean, how hard is it to do that?
I think that's a really pertinent question you ask, and like Ben and I have a friend that just recently asked us about the industry, and the first thing he was looking at was, hey, I'm going to start a farm because I know how to grow well. He used to grow in college. I went to college with him, and I was like, man, there are so many big operations out there right now. If you think you're going to go and jump in against these guys, like, you better be damn well funded, have land, and all these things that have to go along with it. Yeah, and it's just like you said, like, people come in and they look at the obvious. I'm going to grow marijuana, or I'm going to start a vape pen company. Right. I was at High Times, and I was so glad I was a show producer, because I looked at like the 200 vape pens, and like, unless you're super well funded, unless you have an incredibly strong brand and your product is really good, and you need all three of those things, two of them you're not going to win. Yeah. It's just like everybody's jumping on the obvious. So just as you said, like, take something that you already do or something that you love in your life and figure out how to integrate that in an out-of-box way to cannabis. Like, that's what I did with the events and kind of integrated. And there's so many other things you could do, So I really push people to say, hey, don't jump in and think you're going to grow or open a dispensary. Think a little more originally than that, right?
So this may be a leading question, but fuck it. Do you think there's a bloodbath coming in terms of kind of the small brand wars within the industry as it just get like,
yes.
Is there like a bubble of products right now?
For sure.
Okay.
Undoubtedly. It's so hard without the without the laws and the legalities really even in place yet. But yeah, I mean, it's a flooded marketplace. It's absolutely crushed with so many different products and brands, and they're just not going to be able to all survive. So I almost analogize that over to like the growers community. You look at the growers who for a long time really ran this whole industry, and now because of regulation, a lot of those guys aren't going to be around anymore either. And they're like the true players that allowed us to be where we are today. And I find it really sad that they're not going to be here anymore because we're in this new era. But it's just on both sides of the fence, like you just asked. Like, you need to play the game in a professional sense, the way you guys are teaching people to do it, and the guys that are coming in just have a few bucks and knew how to grow weed in college or something, they're not going to make it.
Yeah, I mean, we particularly, go ahead.
Scalability. I mean, that's the word right here.
Go.
Scalability, and if you don't have the money behind you to scale and the ability to scale, and that's what I'd say well over 70% of the companies out there don't have scalability in front of them.
Yeah, the more that we look at this industry, the more we are starting to see that we already have kind of this preference for companies that can use cannabis as a beachhead, but are kind of offering a solution that's more broad beyond cannabis. It's just cannabis is maybe the right first step to take. And that really means that, I think we've said this before, but I'll say the kind of controversial thing, like in the end, will there even be a cannabis industry, or will it just be like an ingredient that's in things and there's not an industry?
Well, I mean, to me, I think people love brands and their edibles, but I've always thought, this is just a very simplistic, random thought, but like, when we're at the point where you can put a drop of 5 milligrams of THC on anything you eat, what's the reason to go buy an edible when I can just drop it on my chicken wing or whatever else I want,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, there's going to be some radical changes to the entire landscape of this. And I think the way you posed that question, I don't have the answer to it, but I'm really interested to what the answer is going to be.
Yeah. It's not something. It's a scary question to ask if you're in the industry a little bit, but.
Make sure you're relevant, man. Don't be one of 10,000 people out there doing something. Figure out what you're good at and do that, and make sure you're the best at it. Is the way advice I'd give.
Yeah, fair.
Awesome.
What is give me an example of, I think we're making it sound like your life has been very easy. So it's starting, you've started several companies. It's like, oh, you did this, that was great, and then you did this, and that was great. There was a drought, so there was maybe a little bit of a hiccup, but we've made it sound like easy. Tell us about some of the biggest challenges that you've faced and how you overcame them.
Yeah, wow. I immediately think I'll just be honest. I was literally sitting on the couch crying one day because I thought I was a failure. I'd run Snowbomb for over a decade, but because of the weather and everything else, conglomeration in the industry, I wasn't able to really support my family the way I wanted to. And I thought that was the end of my career and I was a failure. And this is to all entrepreneurs, a point you need to hit probably 5 or 6 times in your lifetime. But for me, that was really the first time I'd hit this wall where I was like, man, I've failed. I can't do this anymore. I don't even know what I'm going to do. And now looking back at that, I'm glad that happened to me because that made me what I am now. So having balls is a big piece of being an entrepreneur and having the ability to not, I think this is a really, really big one. And I've been guilty of this too. You have this vision and you're so into it and you think you're so smart and you probably are, but things change and visions need to change. And the people that aren't willing to pivot and just stay headstrong on, I have to follow this goal. Again, those are the ones I think you're lessening your chances of survival. And so for me, it's just been stick with it. I think the simple things that they all say, like the Gary Vee stuff, is honestly true. I've started to really like Gary Vee. It's fuck it, just do it and shut the fuck up and put in the hours, put in the work. The biggest thing I see that pisses me off, to get a little bit Gary Vee on you guys.
Please, yeah.
Just like you just said, everyone thinks it's so easy sometimes, and you put on an event and you just, boom, you make all this money. It's there is so much work that goes into this. So for all these young guys out there that just want to immediately be making cash, I didn't make money for a long time.
Events are one of those, they're very delayed profit model. It's lose money for a while.
At least 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Then maybe you'll be okay. That's the...
Yes.
That's the model.
So be patient and, trust yourself, trust your judgment. And the thing they all say, I have every day people tell me that I have a silly idea or a stupid idea. So to contrast that, not going with what you think, stay true to who you are, be willing to pivot, but don't let anyone ever tell you you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. Just stay the course, and we're all going to fail as entrepreneurs a couple times. You're not a real entrepreneur if you haven't failed a couple times.
You know what?
Amen.
People say that, and I agree with it. But I think it's easy for people to say and hear who have had some success and some failure. So I realize, because I was saying that to entrepreneurs, oh, I failed once. And I'm like, yeah, but I also had some successes. So it's easy for me to be yeah, I fucked that up, right? I think but what I'm seeing with a lot of first-time entrepreneurs is it's hard if all you have is a failure so far. It's really tough.
No, yeah, it's easy if you have money to tell someone money doesn't matter. I get what you're saying.
Right.
But for me, here's a great thing. I think this would be a really good tidbit for an entrepreneur. So with Snowbomb, I was pretty successful. I learned and took a lot of lumps getting to that success, and it taught me a lot because I was out of college when I started that. But I think all kind of alpha male entrepreneurs, I wanted to be the CEO. I'm the CEO and president. That title was so important to me.
Yep.
And it wasn't until I was about 40 years old that I hired someone to be my CEO because he was better at it than me.
Yep.
And I realized better at marketing and brand building than being a CEO, and being able to get your mind away from having to be the ego thing. Take your ego out of this, and you don't need to be the CEO. You just need to fill your role. And
that reminds me of your favorite chant that you make everyone do.
Oh yeah, do you want to do the chant, or should we all?
If we can all partake.
Can we?
Lead us, Carter.
I am not my idea is the chant that we do with early stage founders.
I like that
because they tie their idea so tightly to their sense of who
and they don't listen to
being,
us worth a damn.
Right? Well, no, but if I come to you and say, Jim, your idea sucks, right? If you've tied that idea to your self-worth, what you hear is, Jim, you suck, which is not the same thing. What I'm actually saying is, I care about you and you don't suck and you should not do this particular thing.
Right.
Those are the difference between that message and you suck is a huge chasm for a lot of entrepreneurs to kind of cross. They really feel personally tied to what they're doing.
Old and new, because I could be held guilty of that as well. It's
all of us.
sometimes hard to take yourself out of that equation. But no, I think that's incredibly good thoughts.
So I appreciate you kind of going through this. Hey, I'm be honest, I'm like alpha male athlete guy. I was sobbing on the couch, feeling like I couldn't support my family. Right? Like it's a courageous thing to talk about and say, and I think it's super important. And I think everyone's been there, frankly, whether they want to talk about it or not.
Can I say something on that note? This is more just across, like, to everyone out there in the world, to you guys as friends. Like, a friend of mine, Dave Morin, that we talked about that's speaking, his biggest goal is to solve depression. And in the entrepreneurial community, and especially us alpha CEO type guys, whether you are or aren't, depression runs incredibly deep. And to do what we do, the tax that it takes on your life, your marriage, and everything else is a lot. And so I think one thing I want to make sure I say today, and I say this at all my 420 games, is keep aware of your mental health as an entrepreneur, and if you're feeling depressed, that is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength to actually reach out and say, I need some help for this. And I think most people like us kind of want to just push that down and hide it, and they do kind of feel like it's a weakness. So Dave started a fund for founders. Literally, like, you don't have to pay to go see a psychiatrist if you're suffering from depression.
Really?
If you're a
That's
founder.
incredible.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really, really cool.
I had
slow
no
ventures.
idea.
And so just mental health and checking in once a week or whatever it is to really look in the mirror and be like, am I okay? Is a big deal, because I've done that a few times and looked in the mirror and I was not okay, and I needed to take some time for myself. So that's a big one I want to push.
You know what? I didn't think we were going to go here today, but it's a great topic. One thing that we always encourage founders to go to therapy. Frankly, even if you feel like you're healthy, go to therapy.
Dude,
right?
for everything.
It's very, very important, and it's stigmatized in this culture, almost more than cannabis in some circles, frankly, right? But first of all, what's the name of the Dave Morin's fund? Because I had no idea that there was a resource out there for entrepreneurs.
So I don't know if it's directly related to the Slow Ventures Fund, which is Dave's fund, but I'll find it and send it and share it with you guys so we can Twitter it out. But it's a founders fund for mental health, where they'll pay for you to go see someone if you're in a not good place.
That is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to kind of dive into here is I think founders, I don't know that more than the general population or not, so I'm not going to make judgments on other people's mental health issues, but we hang around a lot of founders, so let's talk about theirs. To be a founder, you often you end up with this, you were talking about being in your flow state. You often kind of end up with this very singular focus about, like, I got to get this done. I got to move the ball forward on this business, right? And which is healthy and good, and we need a good executor.
To a point.
Right. But often that means you forget about all of the things in your personal life, including family, friends, eating well, exercising, taking any time off at all, right? And
you just talked about my life for the last 3 months.
Yeah, no, I've been there, right? Yeah. And so I think we don't really talk about the founder as a human being and making sure that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Well, we've also gotten into the practice of joking about work-life balance in Silicon Valley, right? It's like, everyone's like, what is that? And it's like, no, it's actually kind of important, right?
Right. Well, but I think, right, so the reason that I think people in Silicon Valley joke about it is because there is a mentality, which is where work-life balance means, like, work 8 hours a day and, like, make sure you get in all your fun activity and whatever. And there is some truth to the fact that for a founder, your work-life balance is skewed compared to what many people's are.
Have you guys seen the Defiant Ones?
I have not.
Yes.
This is a great example of people with tunnel vision as entrepreneurs. It was Dre and what was the other guy's name that started Beats?
Jimmy Ive.
Yeah, it's an amazing portrayal of kind of what we're talking about.
We just had the Beats Music CEO on last week, actually.
Oh, wow. For real? I'm following the Beats CEO? I like this.
Yeah.
Similar stature, I would say.
Yeah.
Tall, bald guy.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So interesting. Cool. We have, we're in the last kind of 15 minutes of the show, which is usually where we like to, if we remember, ask the quote studio audience if they've got any questions. We don't have a huge audience, but we do have a couple people there today. yes have questions for Jim?
I definitely have questions. Thank you so much for being here. This has been pretty enlightening, the whole conversation. There's a couple things I'd like to discuss. One is I'd like to piggyback on, you mentioned the difficulty of starting panels and doing events around the world. I wonder why it is that you did New West, if you can talk about that, how New West Summit came about.
Sure. So for me, I came into cannabis out of pretty much the tech world. I had an internet company, and we did online lift tickets and sold those. So my business, although it was a ski industry, was centered around technology. And as I came into this cannabis space, I really looked at all the shows and business conferences out there, and they were all exactly the same. It was like how to open a dispensary or what is CBD, and all the speakers were the same. So it was just a sheer lack of anything that was focused on. To me, technology is the sole driver of this industry in every aspect of it, and no one was doing it. So it was really a hole in the industry that they didn't have yet, thankfully for me, and hopefully we've filled it in a good way.
For me, it's not just a hole. It was just a perception of the industry as well, because still I drive down 101 last night, and I saw HempCon's Hello Weed in bright neon colors, and I'm just like, it's probably a fun event, but I know all these motorists are driving around and that's their image of the industry. Yeah. And I'm just like, ugh. I'm conflicted because I know I'll offend a lot of people being saying that billboard should not exist.
Right.
No, there's a place for that billboard, and that's fine. And
right.
There's a place for that in the industry. But I think what you're seeing is that it's much more than that. It's a much bigger industry than that.
Right.
And
what the industry,
that other part isn't as visible right now. That's
what the industry used to be and was completely made up of, meaning kind of the stoner demographic, is now the minority of the industry.
Yes.
And it's completely shifted. That's the way I look at it.
But that minority still has
it's always going to be there.
visibility.
It will always be a marketplace. It's just a much smaller marketplace than it used to be.
So we need to start the New West Summit 4.0 billboard campaign.
Absolutely. We almost got some billboards this year, but we were too late to the game. But yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
I don't know how effective they are and efficient in terms of advertising.
That's probably why we didn't get them, actually.
Yeah, right. When you pay
when we make a ton of money and we just want to get one to be cool maybe in a few
I
years,
think
but we need to make the money part first.
Yeah, people who look at analytics tend to shy away from billboards.
Yes. Indeed.
But hey, there's another old broken industry. Someone can go fix that. That's fine.
So is it ironic when there's an analytics company that has a billboard in San Francisco?
It could be.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, unless they have great billboard analytics. It looks like there's more questions from Mr. Sabo.
Yes, you mentioned that your wife was a bit apprehensive about telling everyone about what you did. Has that changed? And secondarily, is your daughters, what is their understanding of what you do and of cannabis?
From one Canadad to the
next.
next.
That's a great question. We meant to talk about it. So,
I think what my wife saw was an incredible open arms from our community, and that her concerns, which were very valid, ended up being for naught, because really all of her friends, kind of in the same way as we talked about, some of them were like, oh, I actually use some cannabis or whatever, and so it's actually opened up doors for her to have better relationships or have more dialogue with her friends than chastising her. So that's been great, and I kind of was pretty sure that's the way it was going to go, but I'm thankful it ended up there. And then with my daughters, I've been with you and your daughters before, and I think you've seen, so I just talk about it like it's normal. I never omit the word, and my daughters now just use that word in normal conversation in a way that they completely understand marijuana, and they don't even use that word. They use cannabis is medicine, and it's something that helps me and is not for them. And I really see, although they're still young, 5 and 8, there's no interest I can see in them of I want to try this. They look at it like coffee, which they don't want to try either.
Right, yeah,
right.
Fair. Not to put you on the spot, Sabo, but how do you talk to your kids about it?
I'm very open with them. I teach them as much as their brains can absorb at this point. I feel like they're fairly intelligent, so I try to be as articulate and and granular about the plant and how I use it and how other people use it as well. And I think that they're really starting to become proponents of it as they've seen people smoking on the street, and they're like, they should switch to vaping.
Oh.
Let me turn this around, because I just I was on another podcast last week, and Evan Britton and Nate Jackson asked me, what are you going to do, and / when is it appropriate for your daughter when she's in high school or whatever age that it's okay with you to start using cannabis? And I'd never thought of that before. I'd never thought of my baby girl, you know. And and I was like, wow. And I thought about it for a while, and I've got my number, which I'll play some poker and hold to my chest. But what's your outlook of when it's going to be okay for Sophie to try cannabis for her first time?
You know, I think that I've always tried to have a very much an open door policy with her about how to communicate with myself, and just, you know, that dad's okay with hearing, you know, all your types of problems. So I'm hoping that when she starts getting curious that she'll talk to me about it. But in my head, you know, I was kind of thinking at least wait until college. But I know based on me growing up and my friends that seems pretty unrealistic. So my strategy has been to just really kind of give her a safe space that she knows that she could be very honest with dad, and that I'm not going to judge her, and that I'm just going to try to give her the best advice that I can.
I think it's a very nuanced question, because, I mean, Sabo, your approach is the appropriate, well, everyone's approach is the appropriate one, but like the communication lines are so important, because the conversation is going to shift continuously over time. You know, as we do more studies and find out when is it appropriate for like developmentally to
Well, I mean, I think
do it recreationally, which is I don't
want to be controversial, but we know the brain doesn't finish developing until around 25, 24 for females, and a year later for males. It's not good to do regularly before that. It's just not, right? We know that. I know that the industry.
I'm sure that's true.
Like,
I used it every day since I've been 16, you know, and I turned out okay.
And many of us drank when we were young too, but it wasn't good for us, right? So,
and I will never preach that it is something that they should do at that age, and they should let their brains develop. But I think, like the way Sabo said it, just being rational, like in the place and time we live, and this is going to be everywhere when our kids grow up. Edible, they don't need to smoke it; they can pop a gummy. Right. But the interesting thing to me that I really think is cool is in Colorado, over 10%, so statistically accurate, it's 11% drop in teen cannabis use after it's gone legal.
It's not cool anymore.
It's going to be a generation of kids without tattoos that don't smoke weed, because we're all kind of in the tattoo weed generation.
I do want to make a distinction though also, because there's a difference between experimenting with something a little bit and making it a regular part of your life. Right? And so I think if you do make something taboo for kids, that just makes them want it all the more. So it's like, you know, you have to, like Sabo, you have to have a relationship where they're going to talk to you about it. I'm curious, blah, blah, blah. And then just be open with them about, okay, here are the risks. That's what it does, you know.
So going back to the nuances that I was mentioning, it's like, what about if it's a medical condition and the applications of that? Or what about if we're starting to isolate the compounds? Like, does CBD have the same impacts on the brain that THC does? And the answer is no, because it's different receptors, right? So, you know.
But we don't know what the impacts are.
Right. Well, but going back to the open conversation, like this conversation will be changing throughout time.
No, I think it's great.
Yeah.
But you have to be honest. I think you have to be honest and open with your kids so that they can come to you and say, I'm curious, and just be honest with like, here's what we know, here's what we don't know.
I don't want to be the parent. I think everybody knows this dude or parent or whatever, however you'd want to quantify it. But like in every class, there's one guy who's like, mom and dad are cool, and you go smoke weed at their house and it's open, and you can just smoke in there. And I don't want to be that dad by any means. But I was thinking about saying, you know, like when my daughter gets to be around 16 and we know it's going to be at parties and everything else, like if I sense any interest, being like, hey, you know, if you're interested in this, like, why don't you try it here at home, you know, so I can be with you and make sure that, you know, I wouldn't do it with her, but I think I probably am going to go to the point where she's really interested, being like, I'm okay if you really want to try this, but do it here when we're here.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think I had a friend in high school whose parents said to her in high school, you can try any drug you want at the kitchen table.
Wow.
With me. Wow. Like, that's fine, but I have to be present. And like, that's fine.
Was this just their way of trying to get drugs from their kid?
I wonder, but actually, and honestly, like, she ended up not doing anything because it was like, well, I could.
Yeah. No, that's
so
a
she just
beautiful
didn't do
way
anything.
to put it.
Yeah. But it's a fascinating discussion. I can get very excited about it. You know, my reaction is to, like, there are those parents, and I see those parents, and like, I'm supportive of cannabis as a plant, and it's very valuable, and it's got a lot of health benefits. There are parents who completely overlook kids basically regular use of and abuse of cannabis when their brains aren't fully developed, and it's probably not good for them, and they want to be the cool dad.
Yep,
and that's
absolutely.
not okay.
That's the dad I don't want to be. And
Yeah.
I'm sure those same parents, a lot of them let their kids drink as well, which I don't think it's. I grew up in an era where we were able to drink in high school, and it was kind of the heads turned by all the parents. And I'm going to be a lot more hard on my kids, and they're not going to be drinking in my house until they're of age and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Well, on that very somber note, Ben, is there anything else we're missing before the show? Oh, Princessa's got another question.
Yes, I'm not a
Good.
Canna dad, but I do have 3 daughters. One
Canna
middle
mom.
school- Yeah, one middle school, 2 in high school. We have open conversations about it regularly, and I believe it has helped because they are actually around it way more than what I knew. And so very thankfully, we're having these conversations now. But my last question, I know that we have to wrap up. I'm super passionate about the African American founders. I know you have a big event coming up, and I wanted to find out from you. I mean, you mentioned some pretty powerful things here. One, in order to survive, you need funding, land, backing. I'm wondering how you're incorporating sort of this equity piece into the work that you do now.
In terms of relation to people of color, or
People of color, yes.
well, I think going outside of just people of color, using females and everything else, I love that this industry has become pretty inclusive as it's grown, and more than most that are already out there and established. Here in Oakland this year, we both have some initiatives, I guess across the board. The initiative really is, our event's expensive. It's a $600 ticket for 3 days. So I don't want that to prevent the people that can't afford to be there, whether they're a woman, a person of color, a student, or anything. So generalizing that way, we went out this year and we gave out free tickets to Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Minorities in Cannabis, the Hood Incubators we're doing some stuff with. But by strategically going out and reaching out to all the different pieces of the community as a whole and making sure they're represented at the event is important to me. That's like George Clinton coming in as a keynote speaker. He's not a tech guy, but he represents the lifestyle, and he's a music guy, as we were talking about, so he probably already has that stigma. But he's a really intelligent guy, and I think he's going to exemplify just the inclusiveness of this industry, from people of color to women. I'd really like to see the Latino and Mexican American community have more representation in the cannabis industry. That's the sect that I don't see as much as I'd like. But all in all, I just do my best to be inclusive and make sure everyone's invited, and not make it a monetary thing where it's just if you can pay, you can come, and if not, beat it.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Speaking, if you want to pay and come, Michael, we're going to put a link into the comments section, 50% discount. So, come to New West Summit next week. It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yep.
Is that right? And the Gateway Pitch Slam is on Saturday afternoon. We're giving away $10,000 to the top pitch.
10 big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a fun one. And I hear there's some after parties, which is par for the course for the cannabis industry, I think.
Could be.
Yeah, and the one other thing just to quickly say, Sunday is it's our first year doing a consumer day. So the first 2 days are business to business, Friday, Saturday, and the last day is literally about 100 companies where anyone can come in and check them out. They're giving out free samples, and we've got Rick Barry, Hall of Fame NBA player, talking about pain in cannabis and
wow.
CBD.
Interesting.
And we also have a parenting and cannabis panel with Debbie Goldsberry and Dale Sky Jones and myself. And so there's, on top of the free cannabis and boost, there'll be a lot of education on Sunday for consumers.
I didn't know you've adopted like the AVN model for the conferences, which is great. The last day is for the public.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah, cool. So check it out next week. Michael, I'm going to ask you the question. Who's on next week?
Eric from Defaulse.
Ah, my boy.
All right,
Defaulse. Join us next week. Catch us at New West Summit. Thank you for joining us. Jim, you rock, man.
Thanks.